In this video, we're going to take a look at the subjective nature of grading and how we got to where we are with the different grading companies. And I know that this is a passionate topic for many people, so I just ask that you watch the whole thing before you leave a thoughtful comment. And this video is really to set the groundwork for a video that's going to drop in a couple days, which is what's the difference between a CGC 9.8, 9.6, 9.4, and 9.2. But I realized that I had to lay the groundwork with a video like this first, so stay tuned.
Bryce Comics.
Check out these awesome new pre-sales over at brycecomics.com. Head over to the shop tab and click speculation pre-orders and you'll see 13 currently offered pre-sales, some repeat offenders, first cover appearance of Riri Williams as Ironheart, Nice House on the Lake, Amazing Spider-Man Patrick Gleason, New Agents of Atlas, Nebula, Gamora, Spider-Man, more Riri, more Nice House on the Lake, Action Comics reprint, the 50th anniversary. This is from 1988 at $100 off, the most recent sale of $250, and then these classic X-Men #1 Jim Lee covers. Use code HIGH5 for an additional 10% off when you buy 5 or more pre-sale items. That's an additional 10% off to the already low pre-sale price. Enjoy the show. All right, this is your last chance to enter to win this CGC 9.8 Local Comic Shop Day Gold Foil Edition of Invincible #1. Subscribe to the channel, comment on this video, and like this video, and you are entered to win. I love this cover because it has all 50 of the first Invincible covers on the cover. It's a really cool collectible. Also, sign up for the newsletter at brycecomics.com, and every single month you stay subscribed, you're entered to win a new slab. This month is a CGC 9.8 Gwenom vs. Carnage #1, the Inyahuk Lee 1-in-25 exclusive. And I'm going to put links down in the description for other helpful videos I've done that deal with grading comics. Allowable defects in a CGC 9.8 is a really good one where I discuss all the different defects a book can have and still get that CGC 9.8. I also did a video about Pressable defects, which covers all the different defects that can be improved or eliminated with pressing and cleaning, because just because a book is graded at a 9.6 or a 9.4 or 9.2 doesn't mean that it doesn't have potential to be a 9.8, but you need to be able to identify what is and what isn't a pressable defect. So I'll put a link in the description for those two videos. And first I want to start with a 2-minute history of comic book grading because it's important to get the full picture of this process. So back in the golden and silver age of collecting, grading was really loose. There were no certification companies, and broad ranges of conditions for comics actually sufficed. Then comic conventions started to pop up, and that's when being more specific on grading became necessary because dealers and collectors were able to come together and really start discussing the differences and seeing the differences in grades for the same book in very close conditions. Then in 1977, the Mile High or Edgar Church collection of comics was discovered, a massive, immaculately kept collection of Golden Age books that actually caused a shift in the pricing structure and grading for comics. Up until that time, there really weren't that many high-grade copies to set a benchmark against. And lastly, the most important impact on comic book grading was the introduction of CGC, the first and most widely recognized comic book certification company, and then all of the other companies that followed suit. The introduction of CGC and actually certifying a collectible with a grade changed the industry because now everyone knew exactly what they were dealing with. A casual collector or someone new to the hobby has a solid reference of how much they should pay, whereas before it was all very ambiguous and open to interpretation. This caused an explosion in the comic book market and is one of the driving factors of the success of the comics market today. If we didn't have third-party trusted standards to go by, collecting comics wouldn't be nearly as valuable, enjoyable, or collectible because it would be incredibly frustrating to nail down a condition and a price, keeping most people from joining the hobby at all, especially since the vast majority of sales happen online and you cannot accurately grade a comic book from pictures. And I recognize that some people would be much happier with the good old days of collecting with no grading companies, but those people are the minority, and I'm talking about the market as a whole. Now, a 2-minute history of the grading scale. So, the Overstreet Price Guide was founded circa 1970 with a 7-point grading system and quickly evolved to a 10-point grading system that is even more robust because all of the attention was on those higher grade copies of books because those were the ones that are most desirable. And so, we needed to distinguish high grade books even more. Instead of lumping them all into this very broad category, we need to designate little minor differences. And that's why there are 7 different grades for books between a 9.0 and a 10.0, 9.0, 9.2, 9.4, etc. Whereas between a 7 and an 8, there's 3, 7, 7.5, and 8. For many years, the Overstreet grading guide was all there was until the establishment of CGC, who uses the same 10-point scale, but different criteria. This is incredibly important to keep in mind. CGC uses its own grading criteria that is not made public. It does not use the Overstreet grading scale. Same with CBCS and every other grading company. They use their own different grading criteria. CBCS is a little more public with what they use to grade their books, but at the end of the day, it's still a subjective opinion on the grade. A lot of old school collectors will criticize the CGC 9.8 because it has a flaw that Overstreet wouldn't allow in a 9.8. And that is just a ridiculous position to have. CGC does not use the Overstreet criteria. If Overstreet would have been the first third-party grading service, or if they started a grading service today, then their grading criteria would be relevant, but that's not the case. So don't get hung up on the Overstreet grading criteria. You need to familiarize yourself with the grading criteria used by whatever grading company you are using to certify your collectible. This video is focused on CGC because that's who I use for grading, and I have years of submission experience with many books from all different eras, so we'll be combining the little information provided from CGC on their grading scale with all of my years of experience and real-life graded examples to try and get a handle on this. And I will say that the Overstreet grading guide is more strict than the grading criteria used at CGC. So if you use the Overstreet grading guide to grade raw books that are sent to CGC, I think it's safe to assume that they will get that grade or higher. Now, let's talk about the nature of grading. And here's where the trigger warning comes into play, because I know a lot of people are very passionate about this subject, and I get that. I just ask that you listen to everything I have to say before you leave a passionate comment and be thoughtful yourself. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, of course. So I have here an old label from CGC, and this is from a book that I cracked out a while ago. And I want to read on the back, there is a thing called a certification notice that they used to put on the back of their labels. It's no longer like this, but I'm just going to read the first 2 sentences. CGC guarantees this comic book to be genuine and inspected by a minimum of 1 pre-grader and 2 graders. So I want to stop right there. I know a lot of people wonder, does CGC still use 3 graders to grade a book? Well, in the old days, it used to be 1 pre-grader and 2 graders. I'm not sure what a pre-grader is. But now, if you look on their website, it says that at least 2 professionals will have inspected the collectible. So it's no longer 3 people. It's now 2 professionals. They don't even say graders. They just say 2 professionals will have inspected the collectible. And then it goes on to say, the assigned grade represents our opinion as grading is subjective. Grading is subjective, and it's not just CGC. If you send your comics to any of the other grading companies, it would be their subjective opinion on that day. That's the nature of comic book grading. It has always been subjective, and it probably always will be subjective. I can't think of a way to take the human component out of grading. I tried to wrap my head around having computers or programs grade books, but I just can't see how that would work. I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm actually really open to that idea, but it gets really tricky because we've been using the same system for 20 years and 7 million comics have been graded. And if we switch to a different standard, all of those grades would be negated and it would just be really messy. So right now, all we have is humans to grade comics, and humans are subjective. And yes, if they got laid the night before, that could have some kind of effect on the grade. Maybe it was a bad experience. The point is that subjective influences can affect the grade of a book. And I can say from personal experience with CGC and CBCS, I've never actually submitted to CBCS, but I have bought, cracked, and had and owned many copies of their books over the years. And I can say that they are both incredibly consistent. They both have made huge mistakes. They both have made incredibly bad errors. They both have a huge amount of room for improvement, but for the most part, they are both incredibly consistent. And I believe that their grading is consistent enough to be acceptable. Yes, I've had CGC horror stories, but you know what? I've also had CBCS horror stories, and I've seen PGX examples that are so far off base, it's ridiculous. And yes, I've seen CGC 9.8s that are really no better than an 8.5, and I've even seen a 6.0 that came back a 0.5. And guess what? Both of those cases were clerical errors. Someone made a mistake in their computer system. There will be exceptions and there will be mistakes, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's a misconception in the comic community that CGC is some raging dumpster fire that's screwing up 90% of their submissions, and that's just not true. The vast majority of their service goes through without incident, but the small percentage of times that they do make a mistake gets a huge amount of attention because humans are inclined to click on and pay attention to negativity. If I post a video on YouTube called Perfect CGC Unboxing, it's ranked 10 out of 10, my worst performing video of the last 10 videos. If I post that same video but title it CGC Screws Up Again in a big old face plant of me on the thumbnail, it's my #1 best performing video, and YouTube's backend literally shows fireworks and says, this is your best performing video ever. Whatever you did differently in this video, do it again. And that's why the news and headlines are so negative, and whatever bleeds leads, because it just gets clicks. CGC, just like you and me, has some serious room for growth and opportunities to get better, just like you and I. And I think they will get better. At least I hope that they will as they grow. I hope that they put even better practices in place to be even more consistent and accurate. But that is yet to be seen because they just got bought out and are growing incredibly fast. But it is the best system that we've ever had in the comic community to grade comics. And they have done an incredible amount of good for progressing this hobby to the next level. And that's my main takeaway from the subjective nature of grading is, yes, it's not perfect, but it works really, really good. So good that people are willing to spend $3.6 million on a graded comic, that last copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 and 9.6, that they haven't even evaluated in person because they trust this system. And there's ways to leverage the system that we have to your benefit. And that's what this channel is all about, leveraging different resources or ideas to take your collecting to the next level so you can have this hobby fund itself. So you can kick and scream about how inconsistent and unfair our grading companies are, boycott them altogether, or you can recognize them for what they are and leverage the system that we have to your benefit. I think you'll be much happier if you do the latter. Now, I want to point out why grading is so subjective. There are many different types of defects that a comic could have. Let's say 20 different types of defects, just to carry this thought. Things like bends, creases, ticks, spine rolls, miscut, color rub, etc. Let's say there's about 20 different types of defects. And then there's probably about a dozen different degrees of severity of each one of those defects. It can be miscut just a tiny bit, or it could be miscut at a 45-degree angle. There's about a dozen different varying degrees of miscut, just for the sake of argument. And then lastly, there's any combination of those defects that a book can have in those different severities. So there's likely millions of different combinations of defects and their severity that a book can have. I'm not like a mathematician, but maybe one of you are. Leave a note in the comments. If there's 20 different types of defects and 12 different varying degrees for each one of those, and a book can have any degree or combination of those, how many different combinations of defects can a book have? Leave a note in the comments and I'll pin it if somebody has the correct answer. So that's why it's so difficult to nail down a grade and say, okay, a 9.2 can have this list of defects, because each one of those defects can have different severity, and the list would literally be pages and pages long. And that's why it takes a human opinion to make a subjective determination about a book's grade, because they can look at the book, say it has this, this, and this, these defects and this severity, and this book is a 9.2. And as you get more comfortable with grading, you'll be totally okay with that process because you can pick up a book and say with confidence after looking at it that it has these defects and I think it would be a 9.8. And that's also why two books can have the same grade yet look completely different, especially in lower grades, because they have a different set of defects with a different set of severities. And that might be why you pick one 2.5 over another. So I think the more you understand and think about the challenge at hand for grading comics, the more accepting you become of the subjective nature of it. So what do you guys think about our current system and the current subjective nature of grading? Do you think that we're going to carry this system with us far into the future, or do you think there's something that's going to trigger a change somewhere along the way? Keeping in mind that 7 million collectibles and counting have already been graded using this current system and the mess that it would create if we changed it up at this point. But if you can think of a better solution, a better way to grade comic books, please leave a note in the comments below. I'm definitely curious to hear what you have to say. And remember, this video is basically just to lay the groundwork for a video that's going to drop in a couple days that deals with what's the difference between a CGC 9.8, 9.6, 9.4, and 9.2. And we're going to take a look at examples of the same book in different grades to see if we can really nail this thing down. But I realized that I had to do this video first to kind of lay the groundwork for that. I tried to do it all in one and it was like a 45-minute video. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for sticking with me all the way to the end of the video, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Bryce Comics.